afternoon. Welcome to Spy Chat. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. Today, our Executive Director, Chris Costa, is joined by Alan E. Kohler, Jr., FBI Assistant Director, Counterintelligence Division. Alan was named Assistant Director of the FBI's CI Division in April 2020. He had most recently served as a special agent in charge of the Washington Field Office's Counterintelligence Division. He joined the FBI as a special agent in 1996, and his early career included taking part in the FBI's response to the 9/11 attack on the Pentagon. In 2003, Allen transferred to the Counterintelligence Division to manage Russian counterintelligence investigations. Fast forward to 2012, when he served as an assistant legal attaché in London, acting as the FBI's liaison with British intelligence and law enforcement agencies. He returned to FBI headquarters in 2017 as the chief of the Eurasian section, which manages the Bureau's operations countering Russian intelligence threats. In 2018, he was promoted to Deputy Assistant Director in the CI Division. The following year, he was promoted to the Special Agent in charge of the CI Division at the Washington Field Office. He is a recipient of the FBI Director's Award for Outstanding Counterintelligence Investigation, among other awards. After Chris and Alan discuss the issues that are catching their attention, we'll turn to your questions. You've probably been here before, so you know we will ask you to use the Q&A feature to write them in, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible. So thank you so much for being here, Alan, and Chris, thank you for getting this really amazing guest. Now over to you, Chris.
Amanda, as always, thanks for the great introduction. So what a rare opportunity to welcome Alan Kohler here, to have the head of counterintelligence at the FBI willing to talk to our loyal audience about counterintelligence issues. So that's what we're going to focus on today. I just want to remind our audience, or tell our audience really, that I've had an opportunity to see Alan's leadership firsthand. I see also, as a student of counterintelligence, I see and observe the impact that Counterintelligence Division is having on the threat, at least what I can see, what I can observe, and what I can read about in open sources. And certainly there are sensitivities, so there are some things Alan will not be able to talk about, and this audience, of course, understands that. So I'd like to dive right in with kind of a macro article that got my attention from Politico. It talked about the EU having a spy problem. It got my attention because I served in Belgium. I served at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, back in the early 1990s. We had penetrations of NATO, meaning spies that were uncovered there. And at the same time, in those days, we talked about the fact that Russians were running amok post 1989, the wall coming down. So nothing has changed in my eye. In terms of the Russian threat. They were aggressive then. Perhaps they're more aggressive now. Maybe there'll be some studies that articulate that in the future when we're able to really measure it. But the bottom line is certainly the Belgians have their hands full right now with coordinating counterespionage efforts. I will say in the early 1990s, the Belgians were very effective, in my view, based on my interactions with the security services. And it seems that they are cooperating with other Western intelligence services. But just to remind our audience, you have the European Commission, you have the European Parliament, you have NATO headquarters prominently in Brussels. So there's a lot of spying going on by not just Russians, but Chinese. In fact, that's a good segue to the next story that has a Belgian flavor, as well as we're going to transition to the Chinese threat. And it has to do with a Chinese intelligence officer that was lured, according to the media, into Belgium to pay for a purported asset for information from General Electric, commercial information. And when he got to Belgium, he subsequently was arrested, and he ended up being deported to the United States, or extradited to the United States to face a trial. And that Chinese intelligence officer collecting commercial intelligence is now in jail for 20 years for trying to steal GE secrets. So this story resonated with me because I've talked to the director of the FBI, Director Wray. I've heard him talk about the Chinese cheating, stealing, trying to get an added competitive advantage. He's spoken about that publicly. I've interviewed him about that. So it seems that the FBI has been very aggressive on that front. So that article really got my attention, and I've been saving it to talk to Alan about it. Additionally, there's another article that gets my attention, and we've talked about this at Spy Chat, and it has to do with Chinese police posts, not just in the United States in places like New York City and maybe elsewhere, but the Chinese have police officers purportedly tracking dissidents beyond the borders of China. They've done it in the Netherlands. They seem to be doing it in the United States. That is a problem. The Chinese have a program, I believe they named it Operation Fox Hunt, where they track fugitives abroad. And that's a fascinating dynamic. It's a problem. They violate the sovereignty, not just of the United States, but other countries as well. Iran. So I'm transitioning, not as seamless as I would like, to another threat. We've talked about this in the past, but to update the story, 3 individuals were arrested for a plot to kill an American citizen here in the United States, a dissident, a human rights activist in Brooklyn. The Iranians, it's not beyond their capabilities and certainly their intentions to track dissidents in the United States and set them up for kidnapping or an assassination. That is a problem. And by the way, and parenthetically, the Iranians do that worldwide, and that continues to be a significant problem. Perhaps Alan can talk about that. So the next story I want to talk about allows us to go full circle and talk about the Russian threat. And I appreciate that Alan might not be able to talk about this case because it's current, but it's been reported by the Washington Post, New York Times, as well as the Wall Street Journal. And it has to do with a director level individual that works for the BND. The BND is a great partner to the United States. It's Germany's foreign intelligence collection activity, their version of the CIA. And it seems that the German spy service has a mole in their midst that's been picked up and arrested and being questioned for committing espionage. It seems like he is possibly working for the Russians. He has access, obviously, to information from other Western intelligence services. So in this business, when you ferret out a spy, then the next thing that happens is there is a detailed, painstaking damage assessment. How much damage has he done? So not only would the United States look at what information have we shared with the Germans, has that information been divulged to the Russians? But most importantly, what I saw in this article that really got my attention is the fact that the individuals that have been arrested, and there have been 2 of them that are apparently being questioned in Germany, and ostensibly the FBI also cooperated in one of those arrests. Again, I don't know if Alan can talk about that, but what got my attention is the possibility that these individuals are motivated by the far right. In other words, they might be caught up in a far right milieu, if you will, and that might have motivated them to provide intelligence to the Russians. And obviously the Russians are looking for lots of intelligence information on that are germane to the fight in Ukraine. And finally, I just want to put a finer point on Russian espionage. I've seen numbers somewhere between 400 and 600 possible Russian intelligence officers have been sent packing out of Western countries in Europe. That is significant. So what does that mean from a counterintelligence standpoint? From my optic, it means that the Russians are no longer going to be able to spy out of their diplomatic stations, if you will, their embassies overseas. So they're going to use non-official cover operators, if you will. And that is happening too. For example, an individual on a Brazilian passport rolled into Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands and was arrested. He was suspected of being a Russian deep cover agent, if you will, trying to get access to an international, I think the International Criminal Tribunal, which the Russians are very interested in right now. And that same pattern played out in Norway. So that just underscores the idea that there is a bit of a spy mania happening right now. I don't know how to compare it to what we were seeing in the early 1990s. Suffice to say, there is a lot of espionage happening, and certainly the FBI has a lot of work on their plates. Let me just check my notes and make sure I covered all the things that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I guess lastly, I just want to highlight an article that I really want to share with our loyal audience that I published in anticipation of this in The Hill, I believe last week. And my argument is we are in a new era of counterintelligence. And there's a fight that's not only going on here in the United States, but in what I have characterized in many others as a gray zone, places like Africa, where Chinese intelligence officers and especially Russians are trying to counter US influence. In that space, I believe the United States needs to be far more aggressive. And I make the case that special operations can do counterintelligence selectively and judiciously. We work together collectively on counterterrorism post 9/11. I just think that the FBI needs to continue receiving the right resources from Congress, but at the same time, other departments and agencies need to ensure that they're focused on this gray zone threat overseas. So I covered a lot of ground. I just want to finish my remarks with a book recommendation. I forgot to tell you this, Alan, that our audience always looks forward to a book recommendation. I just finished reading, and it's a tome, G-Man by Beverly Gage. And I'm not sure that the FBI will necessarily love the book, but as a student of the FBI and having read all the biographies on J. Edgar Hoover, I found this to be more balanced than any other book I read about Hoover. That said, whether he's a villain or a hero, depending on your perspective, it really, really zeroes in on the evolution of counterintelligence. So I really enjoyed it, ramping up for this discussion today. So with all of that said, I just have one prompting question, and I'll turn it over to you. Maybe, Alan, you can also talk about the threat landscape from a counterintelligence standpoint that you see. All of the ground that I covered really underscores the threat that you are dealing with and you are handling as really, the lead agency on counterintelligence. You're working on all of that. So perhaps you can talk about the threat landscape as you see it. I'm going to turn it over to you. Feel free to draw me into the discussion any way you feel it appropriate, but then we'll move into questions. Over to you, Alan.
Well, thank you very much, Chris and Amanda. Thanks for having me here. I've enjoyed everything the Spy Museum does between the Spy Talks and the Spy Cast. So thank you for having me. So I think my division has been involved in almost everything that you mentioned in your article review there. For me personally, all of it except for the book, because I've been working on all those other things. I haven't had time to read the book, but a lot of my colleagues have, and they've said it's an excellent and fair accounting of Hoover. So I look forward to reading that at some point. So I think just to lead off with your first story about the EU as a spy problem, I think the United States absolutely has a spy problem, and my division is laser focused on it, and we're trying to come up with ways to work collectively to counter those threats. It is way beyond what the quote unquote traditional spy problem would have been back in the 90s, where we were so focused on intelligence officers, and that was our considered our major threat. We spent a lot of time protecting US government secrets. And really what has happened over the last 20 years or so is a realization inside the FBI and inside the intelligence community that the information we need to protect is not necessarily classified government documents. It is the information that resides in companies, in academia, that provide the cutting edge research. They come up with the procedures and devices that make our society better and guarantee our national security and economic security. We have had to change how we view the threats and the things we need to protect dramatically over the last 20 years or so. So if you look at it from a perspective of how Russia, China, and Iran are targeting us, there's sort of a universe of what they are targeting and what we want to protect. And what they're targeting, we're monitoring their efforts. What we want to protect, we obviously engage quite a bit with the stakeholders there. And it's that overlap of when they're targeting something that is very important to us, that's where the FBI and our partners engage aggressively with sophisticated operations to try and beat back what either Russia, China, Iran, or others are trying to do. You mentioned some of those cases, and I'm happy to talk more about those, Chris. I will say, though, that your article, if I could just jump ahead to the article you wrote, is spot on. That DOD a few years back changed their strategy to focus on great power competition as opposed to military. Prioritizing military conflict. And we need DOD and we need others to join us in the fight. The counterintelligence world has suffered for years and decades on being in the shadows, sort of the silent warriors, very much stovepiped, even inside the FBI, but certainly within the intelligence community. And that is absolutely changing for all the reasons I said earlier, that the threat landscape has changed. And it's not just about intelligence officers, it's about talent plan acquisition and IP theft through universities and academia. It's joint ventures, it's cyber vectors, it's approaches through social media. The internet has been a great thing for all of us, but it's also been a vector and a facilitator for a lot of intelligence operations that we face today. But your article talking about partnering up with groups that potentially haven't been traditional CI partners in the world is spot on, because we have in the FBI and in the intelligence community, we've created the National Counterintelligence Task Force, which is a sister task force to the joint terrorism task forces, which your viewers may know more about, and they've been around for 20 plus years. And it's a realization that the FBI, NCIS, OSI, CIA, none of us can do this on our own. We all have resources and capabilities and people and data that we need to pool together to combat our adversaries. And we are putting everybody in a room together. We're being as transparent as we can about the information, and we're coming up with ways that we can counter what our adversaries are doing to us in new and novel ways, which is important to me because, and we talked about this a couple of days ago. My division has been around for 83 years, and we've been watching the Soviets for that long. But conversely, they've been watching us for that long, and they've been keeping book on how the FBI operates and the questions we ask and the approaches and techniques that we use. I need people to come up with new ways of approaching the problem, and that's going to happen by bringing in fresh perspective from other agencies and the smart people that every other agency has. So, Chris, thank you for the chance to be here. Happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Hey, thanks, Alan. Before we go to questions, I just wanted to underscore that you've brought in outsiders to address your division. I've had an opportunity to talk to them. Again, that's leadership, and we really appreciate that. And I think that's why the CI division is getting after the threat. It's not the same threat, and you made that point so well. So I very much appreciate that. And I just have a reclama, and that is I neglected to mention, so it might come up in questions and answers. My favorite month of counterintelligence in all of 2022 was October, when the Attorney General talked about the FBI disrupting, I think, somewhere between 10 or 12 Chinese intelligence officers or their agents. There was a press conference, all very public, and that's where Director Wray talked about the Chinese really playing this unfair advantage, trying to seek competitive advantage by unlawful means, if you will. And there were 3 cases that the FBI spoke about, 3 separate cases, to include a double agent operation. So it was very public. It was very unusual to have that level of detail, but I thought that was representative of the kind of work that the FBI division is doing. And I said this in my article: you're playing both defense and offense at the same time. And I learned decades ago that that is the best kind of counterintelligence, where you can do both at once, offense and defense. And that was a maxim for counterintelligence. So I just wanted to follow up on that. And, if you don't have any other comments, we'll go to questions and answers. There'll be plenty of time, I think, for us to address the audience.
Let me just say, Chris, I appreciate you noticing that. And we have made an effort to be more open about the threats. If we had this conversation 10 years ago, there's no way an FBI counterintelligence assistant director would go publicly and talk about Russia and China out loud. And we realize, because the people we need to impact and the people we need to protect are the public and are the companies in academia, we need to get that message to them. And the only way to do that, and the only way to talk about the only way to get the point across that China is an existential threat to us over the next 50 years is to talk about it and to say exactly what they're doing and be upfront about it and support those assertions with facts. And we are trying to do that more and more. And October was a really good month for us in terms of what we could tell. We could tell the story, and we had the AG and the DAG and the director stand up and do it. And we look forward to more of those type days in the future.
Thanks, Alan. We look forward to talking to our guests about it. Amanda, over to you. I'm sure we have some great questions teed up.
Oh, we do. We've had, and they're really wide ranging. Usually I try to lump things together, but because we're really CI counterintelligence focused, that's going to be our umbrella today. So they're wide ranging, but focusing on that. And this one came in minutes into the presentation, and it's a very cool question. How beneficial or harmful is artificial intelligence to our counterintelligence efforts?
Oh my gosh. So I think we don't even know yet. It's a benefit and it's a danger. I think much like the rest of the world, we're all playing with ChatGPT at home and trying to figure out just what that can do and what it can't do. But for me, for example, I can envision a situation where, so we've talked about our concerns about clearance holders, for example, being targeted over social media, or engineers in companies being targeted. Right now, we believe that is happening by intelligence officers creating fake profiles and literally going on and introducing themselves. I could easily see a day where artificial intelligence takes over that aspect, and the first round of engagement with thousands or even millions of people here in the United States is through an AI bot that filters out and then hands it off to an intelligence officer for later cultivation. I think the ramifications and the implications of artificial intelligence on our work are just starting to be considered and realized. And there are pockets of brilliance inside the community now that are using it to help us cull through mountains of data to figure out what we need to action and what we don't need to action. That's probably the biggest benefit that we've had in here in the Bureau is from a data analysis standpoint, how just to really flag what we need to worry about. But our adversaries, I know they're working on it, and we're very concerned about what they're going to throw our way.
Chris, are you
Yeah.
using
So,
AI to?
no, Alan looked at it through a CI lens, and that's a great question, whoever asked that from our audience. I would just make the point, using AI to identify deep fakes would be extremely and exceedingly helpful, because I am concerned about the amount of havoc that can play with deep fakes. In other words, a picture that is completely fabricated to demonstrate something. I recall when I was at the White House, I believe there was a deep fake that just suggested that there was a sniper on a roof somewhere in the country, enough to get our attention. It was ISIS delivered, and the idea that that was a deep fake was problematic, but quickly refuted, if you will. So just imagine what artificial intelligence could do to wreak havoc and really just create mischief, because that's, frankly, that's an objective of intelligence services, to mess with other intelligence services, right? That is what you want them to do. A principle is, you want, if you're an adversary, the FBI or MI5, to waste their time. So I think there are a lot of implications. So that was a great question.
Yeah, and I'll just to comment on that again. One of our biggest concerns is during election season, where you can imagine if there's a deep fake of one of the main presidential candidates, and we can't catch that in time, or the internet companies can't catch it in time, and it goes out. It's just like everything, that first lie is what sticks, and the correction often isn't heard. So we're very much in a race here of how fast deep fakes can be developed and how fast the detection can be developed. And it's the eternal question in intelligence business is, adversaries are advancing, and we're trying to advance hopefully ahead of them. But the deep fakes and artificial intelligence applications is definitely one of our biggest concerns.
This question is brilliantly worded. I'm not going to summarize it. I'm just going to read it. How transferable have the international liaison relationships developed in a counterterrorism context over the past 20 years been for international liaison on counterintelligence? Are there similar alignments of interests, practices, capabilities, and policies with international partners as in the CT world? Or are there particular challenges and opportunities that create different sources of friction or success in the CI world?
That is a really good question. So I would say at a first answer, our relationship with the Five Eyes is a brother-sister relationship on the counterintelligence side. We work every day with them, and I have actually members of the Five Eye agencies in my division coordinating every single day. We have done more together over the last 5 years than we did in the past 10 years, and much more than that previous to that time. And it's a reflection of the points I tried to make earlier, that we're all stronger together, we're all better together. And we've had instances late last year where our director got on a stage with the MI5 director general and made a speech about our partnership working China. It is absolutely something that is a huge focus for us. The threats from China, the threats from Russia have driven us together. In fact, we say the person that's done the most to foster international cooperation this past year is Vladimir Putin, because it's an international crisis that we have all surged to. And while we had a spirit of cooperation before that, now we've got a rallying event that we can work together on. And that has sort of broken through some of the maybe some of the delays or some of the red tape that would have previously been there. And it's created new muscle memory that we're just going to be so much better for it. But the international worry about the expansion of China and the growing influence of China has driven us and our partners together more. And technology is making the sharing and the communication so much better. So it's not about getting on a plane and flying to Germany or to France to have a meeting. We can communicate digitally now, and makes us much more efficient and effective.
I'd just say thanks for that, Alan. Only you can really offer an assessment of those relationships. My sense was what you articulated, but I'm only guessing. I also want to make the point that from a lessons learned standpoint, and I think I alluded to this in the article if I didn't directly tackle it, and that is we can learn excellent lessons from our cooperation with partners on counterterrorism. There are many lessons that we learned by forging partners in the counterterrorism fight. Those lessons have to be replicated in the counterintelligence arena. And as you heard from Alan, it seems that that is playing out. And that's a great point. The MI5 director and Director Ray talking in the UK. And I think the MI6 director has also talked with his counterpart, the director of the CIA. But the bottom line is it is an opportunity now, given the threat, for communities that didn't work together in the past to come together. So it is encouraging to hear that from Alan. Great question. Powerful question.
Now we have a question from someone formerly at FBI units that would have fallen under your leadership. And he asked or suggests that in the 2019 indictment of Huawei's, DOJ detailed the employee incentive program to steal Western secrets. So kind of effectively turning the entire workforce into a non-traditional human network. In your opinion, how worried should we be that other nations are applying a similar model, and how do you counter that risk?
So I won't get into details about the Huawei case, but in the indictments, what the question is referring to is there's an allegation that Huawei was essentially incentivizing its employees to steal intellectual property from other companies. And that is an MO that we see broadly from the government of China. And my caveat, I have to say, is that our concern is not about the people of China. It is coming from the government of China that is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And they have set up through a series of plans made in China 2025, their 5-year plans. They have essentially put out a shopping list of technologies that they want to lead the world in over the course of the next 5 years or by mid-century. And then they have subsequently set up incentive programs, talent plans, and others that literally provides incentives through money and research facilities and education for people to go and collect that information. And while talent plans by themselves are not illegal, they certainly incentivize behavior that is unhelpful and damaging to the United States. So other countries do have their version of a talent plan, and they do incentivize, in certain instances, theft of IP. But far and away, China is the concern for us. And the way I've said it is, even if you merged all of the threats from other countries together, that still is much smaller than the threat from the Chinese Communist Party that we're facing. So absolutely, we're concerned about incentivization of theft. It is not just about what intelligence officers are doing on the streets of Washington, D.C. anymore. There are multiple vectors that are incentivized by authoritarian regimes that we need to worry about these days.
Yeah, I have nothing further to add. That's very, very helpful to hear that. Thanks, Alan. What else we have, Amanda?
We have questions about academia and who should be allowed to study here, and also how can students also be inspired to work in counterintelligence. So kind of a two-way or a broad-ranging question about academia.
Yeah, so the academia conversation could be a long one, and I spend a lot of my time. It's probably the outside groups that I've tried to engage with the most are the universities, the research vice presidents, academic association presidents, trying to explain why we care about threats on campuses the way we do, and try to dispel some rumors. And what you have is a sort of a clash of interests where the FBI is very much interested in protecting the critical technologies that our adversaries are after. However, you have a conflict where you have researchers who are trying to do fundamental research, which lifts all boats, makes the world better, advances humankind. But some of those technologies are going to have a military application or potentially an economic application that is detrimental to the United States. And I think that friction is fine. There's a natural friction there. We each have our jobs, and we're trying to highlight what our concerns are. The academic community talks about the fear, frankly, from the U.S. government and the FBI on the behalf of the researchers. You know, they ask, is the United States trying to squash academic collaboration with some very smart people from China? And the answer to that is absolutely not. We don't want that. Foreign professors and foreign students is critical to the continued success of the United States. I mean, after all, we are the melting pot. We're all, none of us probably can draw our families back to the 1500s here in the United States. My grandmother was born in Scotland, right? So all of us are product of immigrants. So it's critically important that these people come in and study and teach, and it's also critically important that they stay here and work in the companies that drive the industry and the advancements in the United States. But we need universities and companies and anybody who engages with an element of the Chinese government to realize and go into those engagements with their eyes wide open, that the engagement may not be as it seems. There may be ulterior motives, or there may be incentives or reasons why that person or entity is potentially forced to do things to the detriment of your university. And the Chinese Communist Party has a lot of sway, and the government has a lot of sway over people and property and money back home in China in a way that we would not have. We would certainly not employ that sort of force against somebody here in the U.S. So I hope that answers the first part of the question in terms of, is academia worried about, academia has a concern about the FBI's involvement. In terms of having students come into the FBI, we need smart people to come into the FBI and work this problem with us, all these problems. Counterintelligence is a growth industry. We have job security here in the FBI and in every intelligence agency that works counterintelligence, because this is the threat of the future. And we need smart people that want to come in and do this. And again, as I said before, bring in their new ideas and their knowledge and their understanding of AI and quantum and all these other critical technologies that are going to be key to success in the future.
Along that note, a guest wants to know about any books that you would recommend on learning more about counterintelligence.
Oh my gosh. So the book I was given when I was a new agent at Quantico was Spy versus Spy by Ron Kessler. And it's an old book. It covers a lot of things inside how the FBI did work against the GRU and other entities in the 90s. And I bought a bunch of copies off eBay, and I've got them on my shelf, and I still hand them out to new agents when I get a chance. Two other books I would recommend, if you indulge me. One is The Human Factor by Graham Greene. It's fiction, and it's a short read. It's a weekend read, maybe a week for me, but a weekend for others. And it gives a great, it's the best account of the human side of espionage and the angst that someone goes through. And it's written by a former practitioner who really gets what intelligence business is about. And then the last book is Operation Mincemeat by Ben McIntyre. There's been a lot of books that talk about the Operation Mincemeat, and hopefully your listeners know what that's about. But that book does a really, really good job, I think, of describing the sense of urgency that the Brits had during World War II and why they had to come up with clever ideas like mincemeat. And then it also talks about the extent that they went through to come up with that deception operation to fool the Germans to take a certain act. And I use that book as an example to tell people, hey, we need to instill that sense of urgency in ourselves, because even though we're separated by two oceans and friends on both sides, we need to act like we're under attack, because we just don't necessarily have people coming on the beach here in the United States. So those would be the books that I recommend for folks to read.
Thank you.
Hey, Amanda,
Yeah.
I've got to dovetail off of that because we're talking about books, right?
Sorry.
No, you know my passion for recommending intelligence books. I would just offer that there's an obscure book out there. The author actually passed away, I think, last year, Angelo Codavilla, but he did an excellent job in a book called Informing Statecraft. Help me understand the implications of counterintelligence, how it supports covert action, how it's so crucial. It's a policy book, and yet he offers a lot of excellent stories. Again, it's a obscure book. It's not a fun story like Mincemeat that Alan just referred to, but I think it's a really important book to think about counterintelligence. And for those of you who don't know and haven't visited the museum, we do tell the story of Mincemeat and the double cross system and how crucial counterintelligence was to saving tens of thousands of lives, if not protecting the beachhead at Normandy with deception. Had counterintelligence not done their job, tens of thousands of allies would have died. So counterintelligence is a crucial force multiplier. So understanding counterintelligence through a historical lens is crucial. So I appreciate the recommendations that Alan offered, but I'd also take a look at Informing Statecraft and come by the museum.
Yes, come by the museum, right, Chris? We like that. This is a question from one of our good friends, and it's Women's History Month. So this is coming from an amazing woman, retired from a great career in intelligence. And she wants to know about the recent apprehension of Charles McGonagall. And are there additional tools in place or lessons learned to ensure that moles are apprehended before unspoken damage is found? He's, of course, was a high-ranking FBI official, for those who don't know.
Yeah, so not a lot I can say about the McGonagall case. It's obviously an ongoing matter. I can say it was a disappointment to us when we found out about it. We've been working that case obviously for a couple of years. And part of any internal investigation is trying to figure out how we could have caught this sooner, and were there signs that we missed, and do we have policies and processes in place that will catch this if, God forbid, there's a next time. So without talking specifically about that case, people should be assured that we are of course reviewing everything about that case and about our processes that can hopefully eliminate that from happening again.
Yeah, and clearly, I don't want to talk a lot about that case, but I can offer for our audience that if you want to follow up, there are pieces that have been published on that in the Post, the Wall Street Journal, and it might be more of an ethics problem than a spy problem. We'll see what the courts determine. But from my optic, I mean, I know one of the defense attorneys, obviously he's not talking either. It might be more ethics than it is a counter espionage case, but it's interesting to me. It links to Albanians, it links to organized crime. It's fascinating. We'll see where this lands. More to follow on that probably in future spy chats.
Another good friend of the museum has a question about those who are infiltrating the U.S. for malign purposes. Are they primarily non-citizens? Have you noticed any significant increase in U.S. citizens working for foreign countries as spies? Can you answer that?
So our interest in foreign influence, if we stick to that specific topic, is generally limited to instances where it's subversive, undeclared, criminal, or coercive behavior. we will not get in, the FBI will not engage if it's, for example, a diplomat engaging with State Department or a congressman, for example, because they're overtly saying, hey, I'm a diplomat, I'm a representative of country X. Our concern is when it's a foreign entity hiding their hand through any one of those four methods: subversive, undeclared, criminal, and coercive, to influence a member of Congress, someone in the White House, a mayor, a governor, to the detriment of the United States or to the benefit of the foreign power. And we will absolutely jump in front of that with investigations. In many cases, we'll do defensive briefings to the targeted individual. And in some cases, we'll run operations against those foreign influence operations to try and stop them or push them or direct them in a different direction. It's a concern for us. I can't say sitting here today that I see a change in the posture of, is it mostly coming from foreign citizens or US citizens? I don't know if I've got the data that I could share, but it does change for us how we work it, because if you have a US citizen engaging with someone inside the United States, almost all that they do is going to be covered by First Amendment protected privileges. And that is not something the FBI would engage in. So when you think about an American writing a letter to his congressman or posting messages online, whether it's true or not, that is not something the FBI even reads. It's not something the FBI would engage in. We engage when we know, we learn, okay, that person is doing it on behalf of the Russian government. He's a proxy, either witting or unwitting, of a foreign entity that is doing that to influence one of our national institutions. So that is when our concern is, and we will oftentimes, if we call those folks conduits, Russians may call them, what do they call them, Chris? Useful idiots.
Right.
Back in the day.
Wait, but that's what you call me, Chris.
But these are people that don't necessarily know what they're doing is on behalf of Russia, for example. And we will go out, we'll talk to them and warn them and try and warn them off of the activity. So it is, there's a lot of it. And but to answer your first question, I don't know if I see a difference between USPers doing it or foreign nationals doing it. Our focus is on with a source, and the source for us has to be coming from a foreign country, and it has to be subversive, undeclared, criminal, or coercive.
This is an interesting question about people from Russia and Ukraine moving west, and wondering, is the US and our allies, are we interviewing people if they arrive here in our allies' countries, or this is a dream question because I don't think anyone will answer this. Are any of them former SVR or GU offering to expose Russian agents or sources? So I don't think you reveal that.
The answer to your last question is I certainly hope so. So I will flag this so to answer the first part, absolutely, we are trying to figure out who is coming into the US and who is fleeing Russia, and whether or not they have information that could help us and our partners, 100%. And I'll probably leave it at that. We are actively engaging in a advertising campaign to lure out and talk to individuals who have information that could be of value to us. We have done social media ads, targeted ads, and there's been newspaper reports. There's been news reports on that. We released another YouTube video last week or 2 weeks ago, specifically centered around the 1-year anniversary of the Ukraine invasion, and seeking individuals who want to come and talk to the FBI and potentially want to help their future. So we absolutely think there are individuals out there that are leaving and want to talk to us, and we are absolutely open for business.
If I could just add, Dave Marlowe from CIA appearing on our spy chat, I don't even remember when, also reinforce the same point that Alan just did. CIA is open for business as well, and there's a dissatisfied population, and they're on the move. So one hopes that many of those individuals, the right ones, will volunteer to support Western countries.
Well, we have a few questions that we predicted when we were chatting beforehand. Speaking of things on the move or things that were on the move until they were shot down. Any comments on this recent flurry of balloon activity?
So I think yeah. So the two thoughts on the balloon. Number one is there's been public reports about how the FBI is taking possession of the balloon, and we're helping with the exploitation of it, if any. And I'll just leave it at that. I will say though that and this goes back to some of the things I talked about earlier, that trying to make the public aware what the threats are, and a challenge for us in trying to get people to care about threats is to have them internalize it and have them understand it. How do you get mom and pop to care about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing when they live in Nebraska and they don't have an embassy or a consulate there, and they don't see China taking over an industry? The balloon was actually quite helpful to us, because mom and pop could go out of in their backyard and look up and see the balloon floating overhead. And without getting into details of what we think it was, everybody in the United States knows now that China is spying on us, because they saw it on TV and they saw us shoot it down. And regardless of what the capabilities were on that device, the awareness of the threat in a way that could be absorbed and understood by everybody, sort of every man in the U.S., I think was a good thing. So if there's a silver lining to this, it's that the awareness of the threats was exposed in a very direct way to everybody in America.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you say that, Alan, because, my standard line during the discussions on the balloons, first of all, I will say that our historian, Andrew Hammond, did a great job. He handled all the media on that, and I was thankful that he did, and he did a great job through a historical lens, as well as, currently what we saw play out. He had some excellent commentary. All of that said, what I would tell people is, hey, now that you know that the Chinese are spying, let me tell you what I'm really worried about. And that lent itself to a great discussion on what the Iranians are doing on our soil, that Americans don't necessarily pay attention to, what the Chinese are doing with their police outstations, spying on dissidents, in quotes, of course, and those other activities. So I'm glad you said that, because it's a great opportunity to engage with the public and say, yeah, you're worried about balloons, you should be, but that's just really the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, because these countries are conducting human operations, not to mention election interference and disinformation and a range of other things. So I'm glad you said that. It's a great opportunity to talk to, people about spying in general.
Before I move on to the next question, I should mention, if you happen to have any debris from the Chinese spy balloon lying around the office that you would like to share with the Spy Museum, we are very happy to receive that. I don't think I'll get in too much trouble from our collections manager for that, Chris. So,
That.
Nope.
Nope. All right. With the changing threat landscape, and this plays into your great answer to the last question, are there things the general public should be doing or could be doing to better protect information?
Sure. I think the number one thing everybody can do is just exercise proper cyber hygiene. If you go to NSA's website, for example, it'll tell you everything you need to do to protect yourself and your systems. And it's the common sense stuff that not everybody does, changing your passwords and two-factor authentication, and setting your updates regularly. And then most importantly, don't click on links if you don't know where the links came from. If you do those 4 or 5 things, you will eliminate most of the problems from a cyber perspective, and you'll keep your data protected. The way I also say it is the threats from other countries, Russia, China, Iran, is not something that you're going to see necessarily on the street corner, and that as an individual, you just have to trust your instincts and trust your senses when it comes to concerns. And there's 2 things. Number one is if you work in an industry that is a leading technology industry, for example, if your company has proprietary information and you've signed non-disclosure agreements, if you work obviously in the US government, you have a security clearance, or even if you don't work in the government, you have a security clearance, you know that you have information in your head that other people aren't supposed to know. And when you start getting probed on social media for that, or at a bar, or at a conference, that's when your senses need to alert, and you need to be on guard for what the targeting there is, because that, you could be targeted through any means. So I'd really like people to appreciate that you are a target, particularly if you go and look at the made in 2020, the most recent 5-year plan that the Chinese Communist Party put out. There's a list of key technologies on there that China has put a big crosshairs on that they are coming after. And if you work in any one of those industries, and there's no surprises, it's artificial intelligence and quantum and hypersonics and avionics and that kind of thing, you are a target of the Chinese government's collection. And you just need to be aware that when people probe into areas that they're not supposed to go. And that's your prompt to talk to your security officer, maybe call the FBI, and we'll see what we can do to help.
Can we squish in just, a minute and a half, Alan, if someone is setting off to have a brilliant career like you, what should they do? How can they get started?
Oh my gosh. Well, so what I tell folks if they're trying to get into the FBI, a couple pieces of advice. Number one, if you want to be an agent or an analyst, that's great. But the most important thing is get your foot in the door and get into any job that you can get. And the FBI in particular is a wonderful place where we have jobs for everybody. You can speak a language, you can fly an airplane, you can be an agent, you can be an analyst, and dozens and dozens of other things. Number 2 is you don't necessarily have to have a criminal justice degree or be an attorney to get into the FBI. What I need you to do, or what I would suggest you do, is follow your passion while you're young and be brilliant at it and be awesome at it and be successful, and make it hard for the FBI not to hire you. We don't need lawyers and accountants like we did back in the 50s and 60s. We need a diverse range of people coming in who are really good, really passionate, and can bring their passion and their smarts into the FBI. So that's my advice: is get your foot in the door, and get your foot in the door having been brilliant at whatever you're passionate about for your first 25 to 30 years of your life.
All right, Chris, do you have anything you want to say before I wrap up?
No, I just want to thank Alan again and thank our audience. Alan, it was tremendous to have you today. What a powerful talk, I believe. And our loyal audience really asked, as always, excellent questions. Thank you very much, Alan, for all that you've done in the counterintelligence realm and your leadership.
Thanks, Chris, Amanda. I really appreciate being here. I've enjoyed this show a lot. It's great to be on. Thank you. And thanks to your listeners. Great questions.
Yeah, they were, and trust me, folks, there were double, triple amount of questions that we couldn't get to. So sorry about that, but thank you both, Chris and Alan. Very, very interesting. And I just want to invite everyone to come to our next virtual program. That will be on March 8th at noon, and it will be The Secret Life of Catherine Clark. And that is a Cold War story that you probably don't know about, and you can celebrate Women's History Month with us at noon on the 8th. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming to this, and thank you for your support of our programming. Everyone, take care.